Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Hard Lens Media. My name is Kit Cabello. I'm joined here today with my co-hosts, Paul DuPont, Daniel Lupker. We've got a lot to talk about, and I'm proud to say this. We actually have a live studio audience right now watching us here in the 99 Perspectives studio. They're watching us live as well as
one does.
As one does. So there
when you're
we
in
go.
the same room.
Yeah, when you're in the same room as everyone else. So it's a rarity. Kind of reminds me of our early radio days.
Oh man, yeah, we used to have a lot of people watching us live.
I think
now we just had a lot of people watching us remotely. Thank you guys.
Yeah, and by the way, I really love the poll that we put up on the Hard Lens Media community because
a lot of people responded to that.
Yeah, like at least I think the highest number of people who watch us live on the East Coast. Then it's followed by the people who live on the West Coast. Then elsewhere in the United States. Then outside, and polling at 9%. Chicago, we're at dead last. So, I mean, hey, I'm glad we have a large national/international audience. It's really incredible to see where all of you are coming from.
But let's be fair though. Chicago proper is 1% of the U.S.'s population, and Chicagoland is 3% of the U.S. population. So we still have a much higher density of people watching from Chicago, person to person, Kit.
Perhaps.
Yeah,
But
the East Coast bigger than Chicago. Just
Paul
I mean,
DuPont.
if you're counting that way, sure, maybe.
Yeah, of course.
go simplistic with it.
So we got a lot to talk about. We've got a story about centrist Democrats, the DNC, once again playing some shenanigans in regards towards who's going to be on the 5th Democratic debate stage. Plus, we have two Tulsi Gabbard stories, each one with different unique perspectives. I know Daniel, when he gets to that segment, he's going to definitely go off on the sloppy reporting on Representative Tulsi Gabbard. Well, with that being said, we got to get things started. Enough talking. Let's time for some action to happen. So, centrist Democrats have a new idea to win re-election: ignore labor and give Trump a major trade deal. So it's a win-win, guys. It's good. I mean, what can possibly go wrong?
Brilliant.
So this is a person who we've talked about before, Representative Cherry Bustos, chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, also known as the DCCC, is advocating internally for Democrats to wave through the House President Donald Trump's renegotiated NAFTA without any of the revisions demanded by labor unions and environmentalists. And despite concerns that it locks in high prescription drug prices, Bustos has argued to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that approving Trump's free trade deal is important for vulnerable House Democrats recently flipped Republican seats, according to multiple sources with knowledge of Bustos' strategy. So let me get this straight. The DCCC has this plan of appeasing to Republicans, appeasing to Trump, appeasing to neoliberals, and in order to keep their seats in power, they're going to ignore progressives, unions, activists, environmentalists. They're not really paying attention to what really won a lot of key seats in 2018. I mean, it's a brilliant strategy. No wonder that people don't respect the Democratic Party anymore. Inside the House caucus, the messaging is referred to as showing the ability to walk and chew gum at the same time. Pelosi's office said that the Speaker did not intend to allow the trade agreement to move forward without addressing concerns from environmental, labor, and patients' rights groups. A spokesperson for Bustos emphasized the Congresswoman's support for labor and environment issues. She and the Speaker have taken meetings together with stakeholders to discuss these issues. The Congresswoman has faced and her colleagues currently working with our trade groups to resolve these issues and has withheld her position on the trade deal until we see this process reach its conclusion, which she hopes is a trade deal that has support from a broad set of stakeholders. As she has publicly said for months, there is still work to be done before we reach that point. Publicly, Bustos has called for a trade deal to be strengthened in the key areas where progressives are pushing. We've got to make sure that our workers are treated fairly, and we have to make sure the environmental concerns are addressed and the enforcement of all of this, Bustos said in a public event this summer. If those things can get worked out, I think we can say yes. A House leadership aide suggested Bustos and centrists pushing for a vote have a uphill climb because the fall of spring fuller schedule is crowded, and Bustos currently lacks the sway to work her will. Bustos has help in making the DCCC's argument to caucus. Former caucus chair Joe Crowley, that's right, Joe Crowley, who was ousted by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is now a paid lobbyist for Trump's revised NAFTA. known as the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. Now, look, this is an article from The Intercept, and I urge you guys to read it further. But this is just the first page of information, because I want Paul and Daniel to unload on this one, too. But the whole end of the deal of this article, and what it's basically saying is that the DCCC is more than willing to compromise, work with Republicans, work with people in Wall Street, big banks and major corporations, and work alongside Trump. You know, I just can't help but remember when you're hearing all these centrist Democrats saying that Trump is a threat, he's a danger, oh no! But wait, we got to get this trade deal, because you want to know why? I keep saying this. Democratic voters and Republican voters, independent voters, you got to remember that people in the RNC establishment and DNC establishment are friends with each other, and they take corporate donations from Wall Street, big banks, lobby groups, and major corporations. It's just that simple. It's one big club. You're not part of it. Daniel, Paul, weigh in.
So I think that we have a very interesting story here that really isn't all that interesting unless you don't know a lot about U.S. politics, in which case it is very, very interesting. So what do we have? We have the U.S. Democrats and, of course, Crowley, the wonderful banjo-playing Crowley, who didn't know he was not going to be singing for himself.
Wait, hold
Yeah.
on, Daniel. We got to be. I just need you to remind me of something. Who endorsed him during the general election? Some kind of workers' family thing? I don't know. Remind me.
Oh, I think it was those super Democratic people that have definitely not sold out Working Families Party in New York.
Oh, right.
So yeah, they've that's a whole nother set of kettle burns. We don't have time for that. We have to go into this. So what do we have? We have the corporate Democrats showing what we've always been talking about Trump through and through, that he's a way to fundraise. They don't really dislike him. They maybe dislike his social politics, which are, of course, very, very backward. But Trump is through and through someone that they can get along with on finance, on all the economic terms, the same things that they got along with Obama with, they got along with Bush with, they would have gotten along with Clinton with. Trump just does other things that they don't like. But in the end, like we're seeing right here, Democrats are, again, have the ability to completely dominate the entire U.S. government like they did a number of years ago, a number of decades ago. Instead, that's, of course, through workers, getting like 70, 80% of the populace on your side, minor things like that. But instead, they keep handing it back to Trump, and they refuse to pick up the ball themselves. So what do we get? We get a Democratic Party that continues to make itself laughably hard to compete with, or easy to compete with, I suppose. The Republicans should, by demographics, be losing everything. I mean, they should really be losing everything by 2024. But the Democrats are trying really hard to keep that from happening by abandoning a base that, if they took control of, they would just dominate the country with. Just like FDR, just like people coming after all the way up to Reagan. And they have the option to do that, but their alignment is incorrect. Their alignment is with the rich and wealthy, and that's what they're doing. Yeah. So therefore, Republicans still have a fighting chance.
I think we need to be careful not to let them get away with this kind of nonsense, like, continually. Because this is the same kind of like, you know what, we've got a great idea. You know what we're not doing as Democrats enough? We're not appeasing to moneyed interests enough. We can get some of that centrist vote if we try doing that. I'm like, this is the same fresh idea you've had for the last 40 years. Like, you're not coming up with a new thing. How many times are you going to repackage this and tell us the same lie and brand it as a new, fresh idea that this is the way we're going to do it? This time it's going to work, everybody. We're going to grab people from the middle and on the right, and we're going to big tent party, everybody. This time it's going to work. I mean, we've never tried this before. Brand new idea. I mean, and maybe it's fresh on my mind because we were talking to Nico House yesterday, and he mentioned that he was sitting in a waiting room with James Clapper, who was famous for crafting that it's the job, stupid line that Bill Clinton ran on so heavily. Maybe it's just that's fresh on my mind, but that's what's making me think, like, boy, this is the same fresh tactic we've had for my entire lifetime.
Yeah, but it worked perfectly, Paul. I mean, what happened in 2016? Oh, wait. Now I know what happened in 2016. The DNC was dumb enough to commit election fraud and, in turn, support a corporatist who lost to an orange clown. I mean, go figure. I mean, hey, I don't think the same thing's going to happen again, right? No.
Yeah, so I want to add one little point on this that I think it's hysterical. And we brought this up, we were talking a little beforehand. It's hysterical how the Democratic Party, the DNC, can say we need Republicans and we need centrists, and we can't win without them. They are the core, they are the base, even, of the Democratic Party. But we have a few stories coming up a little bit later when we talk about Tulsi Gabbard. When Tulsi Gabbard gets Republicans and centrists, oh my God, that is terrible. She is not a Democrat. Democrats need to be getting Democrats in the Democratic Party. So it shows that even the idea of bringing this up in the first place is used as nothing more than a talking point to accomplish goals that are outside the scope of what they're even talking about. They just happen to conveniently look like it. They want to get people on the right way. They want to get money. They want to double down on that money, and and that means that they go to the right wing and to the centrists.
Absolutely.
It's
And
a
so
way
that's
of
what they say.
reinforcing the "this is why you can't have those things"
Yeah.
narrative.
And-
Though we need to be sensible and not, you can't reach for all those things. You got to reach across the aisle and accommodate. Hey, this person that wants to get us out of foreign wars also happens to have a lot of traditionally conservative support. Don't look at that. They're all a bunch of,
Traitors.
they're
Right.
all isolationists.
So
That's why.
Before we do move on, I just want everyone to remember, this is the same DCCC that said we got to support incumbents. This is the same DCCC that supports blue dog Democrats. There's one blue dog Democrat, a guy named Dan Lipinski, who votes Republican, but yet he's a Democrat, and the DCCC is still supporting him. And there's numerous other Democrats like him all across the country. Look, this is a serious problem, and the Democrats haven't learned a single thing from 2016. And this will be an epic failure if they drop the ball again. Because I said it before, if the DNC runs on a neoliberal agenda, centrist agenda, be prepared. And if they have a candidate that's a neoliberal, like Biden, be prepared for a potential scenario of Trump winning and another 4 more years of Trump. I hate saying it, but it's reality. But we have to move on to a Tulsi Gabbard
I
story.
want to say very quickly before
Yeah.
we move on, I want to make a note that someone's saying in chat, and you can tell me if this is wrong, from Lisa, it's Carville, not Clapper.
Carvel.
Okay, that's
Yep.
all.
Okay, great. So now we're going to move on to an article from the great state of Hawaii, the Honolulu Press. You guys can check out all our show notes in the description box below. But this article should boil your blood because there's nothing but hypocrisy in it. And when you hear what the author writes about Representative Tulsi Gabbard, well, I'm pretty sure all of you are going to get angry too. Daniel, take it away.
Okay, so we have this wonderful, definitely even-headed, not literally insane article that I'm about to read. And I was thinking before I started this, do I use my regular voice or do I show my disdain by using my disdain voice? And I'm going with my disdain voice. So, in an exclusive interview with KHO on Friday morning, U.S. Rep. Tulsi Gabbard elaborated on why she announced the night before that she would not seek another term in Congress. So, Tulsi Gabbard is not going to run again in Congress. We've covered this yesterday, one of them. We covered it. That's the point. So, now we have Tulsi Gabbard, a quote from her. Rather than waiting later and so the people of Hawaii will have more choices, they won't have to wait until the last minute. Gabbard told KHON via telephone, I'm sure there are other people who would consider running for the seat in Congress, and I owe it to the people of Hawaii for them to be able to have the opportunity to closer consider the choices before them. Now we start with this, let's say, opinion piece. Gabbard is correct. There are, by my count, at least 12 potential Democratic candidates who could seek the 2nd congressional district seat next August, and a handful of Republicans, too. Some even live in the district. And Gabbard is correct that she owes it to the people she represents to let them pick someone else to represent them. But Gabbard should do that immediately, resign her seat now, and let the state hold a special election to pick a replacement. Now, this is a status and a requirement and a demand, shall I say, that I don't hear being asked of anyone else running. I don't hear Elizabeth Warren being asked to step down because it's not a right thing to do. If Gabbard made a choice to do this, let her keep making her choice. So the article continues. It's possible that a little more time on the campaign trail might have turned the race in her favor. If Gabbard steps down now, meaning this week, meaning as early as Monday, a special election should be held in just 60 days from now. Sure, Gabbard would be giving up the $174,000 salary, congressional perks including travel and office expenses, health and pension benefits. But former members of Congress aren't exactly roughing it. They also get a gym in the Capitol, which ostensibly they probably wouldn't go to if they're not in Congress anymore. Also, free parking in the House parking lots, which, again, they might not need to go to if they're not in Congress anymore. This part of the article I really despise, because it's making this very strong connotation that, hey, Tulsi's just staying in for the money. The only reason she's doing the thing that no other people running for Congress are doing, because I want to remind you, other people running for president from the Senate or the House are still in their seats. And I don't hear this kind of conversation coming from them. However, we keep going with the article. Gabbard will have to add the word former to her title when she appears on Sean Hannity. Not quite as classy as Congresswoman Gabbard, but then she wouldn't have to bother showing up in the House chamber to vote either. Not that she shows up at all that often these days. ProPublica says that as of October 22nd, Gabbard has missed 28.6% of the votes in the 116th Congress. Now, I looked this up because they go on to say that she's the sixth most absent congressman. And I thought, I wonder if there's something about the other five that might stand out. And I looked a little bit.
What'd you find out, buddy?
Well, it turns out Tim Ryan, someone who is also apparently running for Congress with less votes and less support, has missed 32.6% of his votes for the same reason. In all primaries, as you might expect, if you're on the campaign trail, you're not going to be there for every single vote that takes place. And I don't think there's any votes that were tied. And if Gabbard was there, the vote would have gone one way. These are mainly votes that had overwhelming support one way or the other. But nonetheless, it's just Gabbard, the only person actually saying, you know what, I'm focusing on the campaign. I don't have the time to do this and make another run for Congress. I'm going to just say right now that I'm not running, something that no one else is doing. And she's getting hammered the hardest for doing that. Well, so it continues.
Yeah.
So if she stepped down now, and she will be able to spend all the time she desires in Grinnell, Iowa, Busey, South Carolina, I should say, and New Hampshire, Las Vegas, Nevada. I am sure folks who live in her soon-to-be former district, by which I mean the people in Hawaii, would be grateful for fresh leadership, and then to use another word she's fond of saying. So I'm going to let this go over
Okay,
you guys.
so I actually read some of the comment section below because people were saying that this person was full of shit, especially, and for the article, mind you, because Christina Park, you were asking who wrote this crap. All our show notes, the links to the articles are in the description box below, so check it out. But don't tune out. Enjoy the Harlan's
He who
Media
shall
Show.
not be named.
Yeah. So basically, here's what I find funny, is that no matter what Representative Tulsi Gabbard does, no matter what she does, what she says, it's not good enough for anyone in the establishment media, because since day one, she entered into the race. Nothing but smears. I'm just wondering just how many times, whether or not she's made, Representative Tulsi Gabbard has made the mental note of counting how many times people have asked her, is she a Russian asset? Are you running third party? Are you an Assad apologist? Are you going to run third party? Are you trade? Like all this bullshit, and now she's stepping down, not running for Congress. It's just another attack towards her. And let's look at all the other politicians running in this election. You have Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Senator Amy Klobuchar, Senator Kamala Harris, Cory Booker. No one's going after them. They're running too. And yes, let's face it, Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren have a bigger political infrastructure, so they might have a little bit more weight to get involved with their own districts that they represent in the United States Senate. But Representative Tulsi Gabbard, in Congress, her first presidential race, it's a monumental effort. Plus, with all the BS she has to deal with the DNC establishment and corporate media, look, she had to make a decision. I understand and respect that decision, and that's her decision alone. But making it seem like she's in this for the money, have you not been paying attention to her message of peace and ending regime change wars? It's bullshit. Paul, take it away.
This is the lens with which a lot of this is evaluated, is that every individual actor is sort of acting only on their own economic incentives, right? That's a base assumption in this article that is not necessarily unfair with a lot of political actors. Like certainly there are a lot of political actors that hold office that will take money from their donors, that will do political favors, that will go on and do speeches at very, very high dollar values. So there certainly is some level of politicians using their political power to personal, particularly financial gain. I use the word incentives because economists like to talk about incentives. People have incentives to do things. But it's very, very hard to try to transpose that onto Tulsi Gabbard and be like, pfft, trying to take that congresswoman's salary, just trying to sucking off the tea to the old government there. Like, what are you talking about? It's not like she has an untoward deal where she's getting speaking fees for thousands and thousands of dollars. Like, that is the salary that all Congress people get. And to Daniel's point, people in the Senate and people in the House don't necessarily step down or almost never step down when running for president. Why is she getting the, proverbial slap on the wrist in the media for this? It doesn't make any sense, and it's just them throwing a hissy fit because they don't like that she is bringing actual anti-war arguments to the table. They don't want to talk about that part of it. They don't want to talk about the actual international war crimes or people that would actually have accountability to the international community. No, we need to talk about is this greedy congressperson from Honolulu who wants that parking space in D.C. Wants that parking space. Can't believe it.
It's crazy because with Tulsi Gabbard, literally she takes a step down a sidewalk, and there's 5 articles about how that sidewalk is owned by Russia, and the way that she took the step was a sign to someone watching in a window that's going to put an X in tape, and that's going to send a thing to someone else, and it's like...
Where the carrier pigeons...
It's like Tulsi Gabbard is literally stepping down so that people... She's like, hey, look, I really don't have time. I'm putting everything I have into this presidential campaign. I'm going to be one of the only congresspeople, senators ever that's running for president to actually sacrifice if I fail, especially when she has such a low chance right now, which makes it, I think, even more honorable that she's doing that. But it doesn't matter. It's Tulsi Gabbard, so we have to hate it. We have to despise it, because to do anything else would, to Paul's point, would be to legitimize her position.
Well, and it's just a low-tier Hail Mary to get someone else in a special election right now.
You want to know what I call these articles? And before we do move on, you know what I call articles like this, especially smear pieces towards progressives and independents? The rent was due. You had to write an article. You probably had to write a smear piece on somebody. Lack of information. You made an assumption about Representative Tulsi Gabbard with no evidence or proof that she's in this for the big game of money. And yes, you might have been being sarcastic, but you wrote this on paper, and of course, when you post it on the internet, people will respond. And I looked at some of those chats.
Are we saying this entire article was sarcastic?
I don't even know, man.
That's a very generous reading.
Yeah.
I think it's too generous.
Yeah, okay, because here's the thing. When you read the comments in there, it's like, what the hell are you writing about? What is this bullshit that you're talking about? Representative Tulsi Gabbard, 16 years of honorable service in the Hawaiian National Guard. 6 years of service in the United States Congress. I don't think she's in it for the money. I think she's in it for the people. And her message speaks for itself.
And I know
her actions speak for itself.
We got to move on. But I do want to ask in chat, if you guys can do a little research for us, you could figure out who wrote the article. Again, it's in our show notes. And let us know. I'm very curious to know, did the person write this spend any time in the military?
Ooh. Low blow. So now moving on to another story. Paul DuPont, you've got a high note story for us.
Yeah, it's a bit of a high note, but
All
also
right.
a little bit of a let's ask some questions. Let's think a little bit about how electoral politics work in varying government systems. So how long have we been talking about just the primaries so far?
Mm-hmm.
Right? A long time.
It's our primary topic.
Right. It's a primary topic, right? And it will continue to be our primary topic for at least the next year, because next year and a month until the actual elections happen. So a good solid 2 years, half of the presidency length, talking about who the next one's going to be. In the UK, it just got decided. Guys, there's going to be an election. It'll be before Christmas. It'll be December 12th. Election's happening. Everyone get ready.
Wait. They can do that?
That's how they,
hey, it
and
almost
what
sounds like
kind of a great
democracy.
system to kind of keep people on their toes and like keep people engaged with what's going on with the day-to-day of their politics and keep their politicians actively involved with the day-to-day of their politics, because an election can come around on a dime, right? There are the scheduled elections that happen every 6 years, I believe, but this is one that, they can call for a vote to have an election. So this one, and the Tories have been really unusual. I don't say that I fully understand the logic behind when to call for a vote for an election, but it seems to have backfired them both on the Tories both times. So if you remember, when Theresa May called an election, that's when Jeremy Corbyn was launched to head up the Labour Party. So this time around, the Labour Party, remember, you're electing a party and the head of that party to be, the prime minister. You're not electing the prime minister. It's a different system than what we have in the United States. So Jeremy Corbyn leading up that Labour Party, he seems to feel like they have pretty good chances. In fact, one of the only things that slowed down the vote on this today in the UK Parliament was Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party trying to move up the vote to December 9th rather than December 12th. That failed. It will be on the 12th. But again, it's a very short time period between just, hey, all right, I guess we got to go campaign right now, because we've got a month and a half before everyone in the country to be like, well, who do we want to be our leader? And so a lot of this centers around, of course, Brexit, which the no-deal Brexit didn't go through. Boris Johnson is not getting what he wanted out of that, and that is why he re-triggered this new vote for prime minister for the leadership party. What do you guys think? Could we see
All right,
Jeremy
Daniel, take it
Corbyn?
away.
I think it'd be nice to see, Bernie Sanders' cousin in well, it's not really his cousin, but his political cousin across the
It's
pond.
his political clone.
Yeah.
There we
Well,
go.
he isn't his brother in the...
His
Yeah,
brother is
he's in the Green Party.
Yeah, is he? So he's actually a UK citizen then.
I think it's a dual citizenship. Yeah.
You can hold office in the UK and dual citizenship? I don't know. I don't know.
I would think so. Yeah, because he
probably have to
he was at
declare
the
one
DNC.
of. He was at the convention.
He was at the
Maybe
convention.
he could be like Tulsi Gabbard and try and run for both places. Oh, wait, never mind. I'm thinking of someone else. So here's what I'm going to get at on this. So just reiterate Paul's point, because I actually didn't even realize this had happened until today and right now. So in the UK, there will be an election triggered, an election process done, campaigning, kissing babies, all the stuff you normally do, and a new government will be selected in the time that a single Democratic, privately run debate takes place. And I'm sure Trump sends out 20 tweets or something, maybe 30, somewhere around there.
It's almost like they have more time to govern.
I forgot how, I'm like, right, the U.S. is very special. Very,
Yeah.
very special. Good.
I think looking at this, we need to be taking notes. And it's going to be an uphill climb for us here in the United States to reform our political system. Look, my own personal perspective, it's different than Paul and Daniel's. I believe that we should have a multi-party system. We should have a parliamentary system. We should have an active voter populace. But to do that, it's going to require massive mobilization. And for Americans, voters, independents, Greens, Libertarians, Socialists, Democratic voters, Republican voters, everyone to get actively involved and participate in our democracy so that we can actually have a true representation. And also special shout out to Lainey Peterson testing the super chat. Thank you so much for that. But with that being said,
No, but I think Lainey's making a good point. If you're wondering if the super chat's working, test it. Send something to us. We'll tell you if we get it.
The small dollar donations don't always go through. Try the high dollar ones. Those work the highest chance of success.
I was having a good point, and it's completely gone. Basically, end of the story is, I want there to be a parliamentary system. We need to be taking notes of this, but in order to do this, we have to deal with the fact that we have a corrupt system here in the United States. The people in Great Britain have I would say, a much more open system, just from my perspective, and look, it requires people to get involved in their political systems, and we need to take notes. We need to get actively involved and participate, and that means all voters, Libertarian voters, Green voters, Republican, Democrats, Socialists, Democratic Socialists, just regular straight-up independent voters. I mean, let's just make this system happen, and hopefully we see some change happen in Great Britain, because the Brexit deal is still not over. I mean, it's still an ongoing crisis, and as far as I'm concerned, Jeremy Corbyn has shown the maturity, the strengths, the courage, and the honor to actually be the new Prime Minister of Great Britain. And hopefully he's able to pull it off successfully.
On a serious note, I totally agree. Jeremy Corbyn is the type of politician that I want to see heading up the UK. One of the things that he's brought to the table more than any other politician is awareness around the issue of Israel and Palestine, and he's taken a lot of heat for it. Some of the ways that he's had to sort of bend over backwards to appease some of the lobby groups that come after him, I think he gives them more credence than he needs to. I think he can stand his ground even stronger than he does. But not to say that he doesn't. I mean, he stands his ground on that particular issue better than almost any politician in the United States. I mean, maybe Ilhan Omar is the only other one that can really come up with it. One thing I do want to add is, if you ever watched proceedings in the House of Lords or the House of Parliament, it's completely different than watching the legislature in the United States. There's so much energy, people standing up and sitting down, and this guy asks a question, and they're going to answer, and he asks a question, they're going to answer. There's so much going on. It's like it's super entertaining.
I'm going to do a reenactment of what you see in Parliament because we actually got a super chat. Thank you, Michael Ungerlander.
Maybe your next super chat can tell us how to pronounce that.
Testing
correctly.
your super chat. Hashtag Tulsi time. I think we are moving on.
We can confirm it worked.
Yeah. Let's actually
move on.
Yeah, moving on to a wide shot. All right, Michael, this is for you. Let's do this.
I'm doing
These
it.
are awesome graphics. In 3, Tulsi time.
Tulsi time.
There you go. Up.
That's Magic Carp amazed at the surfing. He's so amazed. She's surfing.
Okay, there we go.
So, why is it Tulsi time? Well, we're going to talk about Representative Tulsi Gabbard again. And this is a very weird article from the Washington Post. So let me just bring in some context. As you all know, yesterday, live in the studio, we actually had Nico House, the host of Mi Casa Tu Casa and founder of Just Inform, in our studio. We were talking about Politicon. And after the show, myself, Daniel, Paul, and Eric, we hanged out with Nico House and had a few drinks. Great guy to talk to. Nico, come back anytime you want. But, as the evening was going on, I was actually asking him about the Tulsi Gabbard campaign. And, we talked about Iowa and how Tulsi Gabbard actually has a large presence there and that there are a lot of people talking about Representative Tulsi Gabbard and seeing a lot of her signs there. And I'm thinking, okay, that's great. We're seeing something actually happen here. And I also see another super chat, Cassie Lloyd.
Oh, my God.
Testing your super chat, hashtag Bernie or Bust. Listen, we are very grateful for all of your support. You guys are really making this channel happen. And I'm just humbled by everything that's happening with the growth of this channel.
Kathy.
Thank you so much, Cassie.
Long-time supporter, Kathy.
This is Kathy.
Kathy Lloyd.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So with that being said, this is an article from the Washington Post, and it acknowledges that Tulsi Gabbard actually has a growing presence in the state of Iowa. Iowa is going to be the first primary state. Tulsi Gabbard supporters don't just see a sign, they see many in Iowa. And the people that the Washington Post interviews, the youngest person so far, that they mentioned by age is 41 years old. The others are 53 and 75. But it's very interesting how they portray Tulsi Gabbard supporters. Michael Hunt pledged to support a presidential candidate, started with a sign. Not a mystic apparition from above, but an actual billboard on Eisenhower Avenue in Mason City, where he saw the face and name in bright red letters, Tulsi. Let's not kid around. I thought she was attractive, so I looked her up on Facebook. And Hunt, a 53-year-old service technician, that led him to learn about Representative Tulsi Gabbard's anti-war stance, her military experience, and more recently, her public spat with 2016 presidential nominee Hillary Clinton. I'm sorry, I don't believe she was a legitimate candidate. That's just my perspective, my point of view, and I'm pretty sure there's other progressive channels that have a much more harsher view than I do. Daniel, real quick.
I just wanted to say that man has a very unfortunate name.
Yeah. So Tulsi comes out with her message of peace, sitting around and talking to people like adults and sitting at the table with everyone, Hunt said. I have a 17-year-old son, and he's never seen a year of peace. A different type of vibe. What does Tulsi Gabbard's 2020 run say about America? While the top-tier presidential candidates is building robust operations with field offices and strategists in Iowa to boost poll numbers and build momentum, Tulsi Gabbard's campaign is banking on something a little different. basically posting signs in major parts of the states. Gabbard's image is more visible than any other Democratic candidate. There are billboards along highways, and they appear near the Walmart in Mason City, over the Pueblo Viejo restaurant in Des Moines. There are yard signs placed on homes with peeling paint, overflowing trash, and windows covered in cardboard. Interesting how they're describing this. Why? Maybe they're not really talking about the impacts of neoliberalism. There are signs in the yards near the state's fairgrounds, including one surrounded by Halloween-ready graveyard and cardboard tombstones and cobwebs. And it's interesting enough that the article then goes on to describe Tulsi Gabbard's supporters. Campaign officials, and this is from the article, campaign officials say they hope that billboards will draw in voters like Hunt, who will be interested enough to look her up on the web and connect her to a reservoir of online support from an unusual mix of peace-loving non-interventionists, moderates looking for anti-establishment Democrats, white supremacists,
One of these things is not like the other.
veterans, and social media users. That means also people who have, independent channels like us.
Young people.
And social media users
People
who
younger than
sometimes
41.
refer her as mommy. Okay, white supremacists and then social media users who call her mommy. That's Tulsi Gabbard supporters, because if you haven't been paying attention, we've been following her campaign, and the people at her events are people just like you and me. I haven't seen any white nationalist supporters there. And what everyone in the media has forgotten is when that guy, David Duke, gave his endorsement to Tulsi Gabbard, right away like that, she disavowed him. No one talks about that. And I haven't seen any neo-Nazis or Klans members at Tulsi Gabbard rallies. I haven't seen that. But again, the article then...
Can I interject
Yeah, go ahead.
super quick and just remind people that David Duke, the same man who also endorsed Hillary Clinton...
Oh, but that was okay then.
That was perfectly fine. It's when it's done with that way, it's fine. But it's when the person we don't like it's happening with, then it's a big issue we got to care about.
So the article then devolves into how basically, and what I mean by devolves, it goes back into some stuff that we've seen time and time again. It mentions the little infighting between Representative Tulsi Gabbard and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. But then there's a point to where, and I'm pretty sure Paul's going to go off on this one. The article then interviews this one person. And pay attention very closely. Washington Post. Democracy dies in darkness. Two men just came. Okay, so they interviewed this one individual. How did a candidate with such a low name recognition garner so many early supporters? Because it goes on to how basically she has so many billboards and how she's getting so many supporters in Iowa. Two men just came up and asked me if they could just put a sign there, recalled Fred Lee, 74, as he tried fixing his old car in his driveway near the front yard with a Tulsi sign. I said, I don't care. They gave me a business card to call if I wanted to take it down, but I lost it, Lee said, shrugging. Lee said he has never voted before, but he plans to vote in 2020. He has been more consumed with fixing his car than anything and could only name two candidates. Joe Biden's running, ain't he? Lee said. Him and Tulsi. I don't even know her last name. Tulsi is her first name, right? Still around the east side of town, the Whisper campaign showed some residents. It is in an area where residents complain about violence and gangs and are longing for redevelopment. Paul, I know you want to go off on this one.
Real quick, though,
Yeah.
Kate with the super chat, who the F calls Tulsi mommy. Love the show.
I
don't know who calls him that. That's actually very similar to the point that I would make about this. This is anecdotal evidence of people misusing anecdotal evidence.
Well, let's be
Unfortunately.
fair that we know who calls Tulsi mommy. The Washington Post.
Right. So, but this is trying to, okay, let's be clear and honest about some things. There is some portion of Tulsi's support that likes the non-interventionism, but comes ideologically from a more right-of-center origin. Maybe libertarian is something that ballpark. And that's what they're trying to play up here as a negative, right? Because if it was... the first article we covered, which is, hey, we've got the fresh strategy, everyone, let's get the centrists and the right-wingers on our side and we'll have more votes. Next story, she's getting the centrists and the right-wingers on their side and we need to make that sound bad because we made it sound good earlier. But to the point that they're using this guy here as a prop, they found the most backwoods-sounding guy in Iowa they could find. It's like, I don't know, there was there was an election. There are two people that Biden's in it, and they put this sign up so Tulsi's in it. There are two. I mean, Tulsi in 2020, I guess is her last name.
I need to go fix my car some more.
Hashtag
Yeah.
give it up for Country Paul. That is a great voice impression, man. Awesome.
No, Paul
But-
said he wasn't going to do it.
And then I did it.
No,
But-
that was good. I like that.
but
Keep
hold
doing
on,
that. Do
hold
that
on.
more. You did
No.
it perfect.
Hold on.
10 out of 10. 10 out of 10.
There's more though. There's more into this. Another quote that really stood out to me. A 10-minute drive away, Luis Ruz, 41, this is the youngest person so far, had planned a sign on his house too because Gabbard seemed new and fresh. A lifelong Republican, Ruz had switched parties because he was tired of Trump's flip-flopping. He said he was going to help working people, but he gave tax breaks to the rich people, Ruz said. A field organizer for local labor unions. I believe a president has to be strong. I believe in strong immigration policy, but you can't say you're going to build a wall one day and not do it the next day. So again, why are they targeting all these people and individuals? It's almost like, yeah, you're saying that Tulsi Gabbard's gaining a lot of momentum. Yeah, she has a lot of presence in Iowa. But why are you painting her supporters into something that they're not? Or you're going after a very small, significant group. You're really stretching it here. Daniel.
So, if I'm not mistaken, and I've hallucinated the last decade, haven't they been saying that we need a candidate who can get the voters that Obama lost, the people that were these forgotten men in the country who voted for Trump, and we need them. We need a candidate. If we have one candidate we get in the general, it has to be one that can flip Trump supporters to Democrat. Now that Tulsi gets those exact same people, well, Tulsi's just a right-winger. She is this, that, or the other. Negative. It's almost as if the argument they make never really means anything except to make a point that they're trying to push to get an agenda that has nothing to do with what they're actually saying forward. And it just so happens that most of the time, doing what they say will get the candidate that's going to win. But this time, it's a candidate they don't want to win. So the thing that they have told everyone for years that is an essential quality of a candidate is now a detrimental thing that we have to be on the lookout for.
All right, Paul.
So this is, I would say it's an ironic thing, but I always misuse that word, so I'm just going to say it's a weird thing.
It's a copper thing.
Sure. I got it.
It's terrible.
Okay, so think back a few years, and it was Republican strategists who were telling the Republican Party, hey, you've got to go after Latino voters. You've got to go after the Hispanic community. You can't keep vilifying this people group because there's really a lot of confluence there, right? You can really get this voting bloc on board if you just drop some of this anti-immigration stuff that really doesn't necessarily jive with the rest of your policy plan anyway. But in the Democrat case, right, it's, hey, you should really try and go get the labor bloc, the working bloc that is what you're supposed to do. Like, you're supposed to be the labor opposition party, and we need to, it's opposites, right? Hey, Republicans, maybe you should grab the people that you kind of ideologically don't want to grab because they would work really well in your party and it could be a good voting bloc. Consequently, hey, labor, workers' rights, union-supporting Democratic Party, why don't you grab the people you're supposed to be getting? Because for the last, again, 40-ish years, they've just decided that they're on team companies and the workers don't matter anymore.
Yeah.
And they need to be reminded of that. It's just weird that it's opposite.
Right. And so now just remember, again, this is the Washington Post. Now, the thing is, talking to Nico House, yeah, Tulsi Gabbard is growing a presence. But looking at the way corporate media is now portraying Tulsi Gabbard, and not to mention other progressives, independents, Senator Bernie Sanders, it's quite clear that media wants to portray supporters of these said candidates in a different light and something that's negative. But we do have
Just very
real quick. All right, Daniel.
So this just goes into kind of what Paul was building on a different way. So we have obviously the disgusting stereotype that it's like, Mexicans are stealing our jobs, but there's also the stereotype that Mexicans are lazy. Two contradictory things that don't work together. It's so absurd that you just made me realize that the Republicans actually have, they don't really have it now, but they had an opportunity with the Democratic Party being as terrible as it is right now. They had an option to really sweep a huge amount of the Latino vote, get it on their side, and actually grow their base and shrink the Democratic base, but they didn't. And again, the only reason they still won is the Democrats are so useless at what they do, and they're so stuck trying to appease the upper management and get their maxed out contributions that they've missed the entire point of why their party used to be powerful.
All right. And now, and here's the thing, because we're going to focus on our next story, because I saw in the live stream chat, people are asking, well, what about the 5th Democratic debate? Well, remember, I've done a few short videos on this too. There's a lot of rules and regulations, and I always said be surprised to see some shenanigans happening. Be surprised to see the DNC weigh in. With our next story, Daniel Lupker, take it away, because there's probably a very small chance that Representative Tulsi Gabbard may not make it to the 5th Democratic debate stage. Take it away, Daniel.
Okay, so this article actually doesn't just go into the 5th, which it does, but it also goes into the 6th, which I think is as important to bring up now as the 5th.
All right, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, but no, it's definitely both, but it's to the same main point. So the Democratic National Committee recently announced it raised the threshold for their 6th Democratic presidential debate, which will be held in December. So we have one this month, we got one next month. At least they're doing more than like the 2 that they did in the last cycle. That's like the best I can give them, but I really shouldn't be giving them anything. Continuing on, and that'll take place on the 19th. Obviously, we will be covering it. See us there. It will be hosted by Politico and PBS, so maybe it'll be 5% better because it's not NBC or CNN. We'll see.
PBS I can get behind. Politico. Really?
Like I said, 5%. 5%.
Yeah. 5% better.
5%. Okay, so this debate, this 6th debate, not the 5th, and we'll get to the 5th in a second, you have to get 4% support in 4 polls chosen by the DNC because, of course, the DNC will get to pick. And you will also have to get 6% in 2 polls, so you have to get 4% and 2 6%. You also have to have 200,000 unique voters, which I appreciate. That's like the one thing I like in the DNC's pick is that you have to have unique donors, which is novel. Also something that maybe should have a little more focus, ground hours, volunteers, things of that nature I would add in. Anyway, they must meet all these goals by December 12th, and this puts all but the top 5 candidates on the chopping block. But now let's roll back to the 5th debate, which we will be covering rather soon in November. Has 9 candidates remaining in the field of 17 claiming that they have hit the lower thresholds to make the 5th debate. So far it looks like we're going to get Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Andrew Yang, and Tom Steyer, who appeared out of nowhere and gave a lot of money, and now he's in all the debates, as a good democracy will have.
He was boring as hell.
And what I do appreciate about him in the debate, he's like, hey, Bernie, everything you're saying is right. And Paul made a good point. He's like, why don't you just say, look at me buying my way onto the debate field and then walk off to show that?
He's the most perplexing. I mean, clearly he bought his way onto that stage. But I expected somebody who bought their way onto the stage to get up there and be like, Medicare for all sucks, lower all the taxes, corporations need to have unfettered freedom, I'm a Republican with a D in front of my name.
Yeah,
but he didn't. He went, Bernie's right about everything. And then I went, why didn't you just like get on stage and be like, I publicly endorse Bernie. Bye.
Yeah, well, that's asking a lot for somebody like that. So again, look, there is
I
still.
I do want to add one little thing before you go, Kit. And so the people that Kit was mentioning are on the chopping block potentially is Gabbard, Castro, and O'Rourke.
Yeah. Now, look, there is still an open window for Representative Tulsi Gabbard to get in. I'm seeing in the live stream chat that she succeeded in not 1 but 2 polls already, so she's halfway there.
Is that 2 4% polls or 2 6% polls?
No, that's in the next debate.
Okay, sorry.
So for the 5th Democratic debate stage as it stands right now, which will be on November 20th, we will be covering it.
We will be drinking because there's no way to watch it otherwise.
So we will be covering that debate, and the thing is, there is still an open window for Representative Tulsi Gabbard to still get in. But I got to be real with you guys. The window is closing, and now more than ever, people need to participate because I think she has a presence. And after everything that happened this past months in regards to her calling out Hillary Clinton and well as numerous other things, she has presence and she has the ability to really make her presence seen. So now we got to move on to our next story. Paul, take it away.
So this is a pretty long, detailed, almost thesis length article written by Whitney Webb, but I wanted to just get to the the very basics of it and direct everyone to our show notes for further reading because we're not going to have time to go into all of it. But this is just one of those little things that kind of went under the radar that I thought was more important than I think a lot of the press gave it attention. So the title of the piece is William Barr formally announces Orwellian pre-crime program, which is Whitney Webb's way of being a little hyperbolic to make a point, but the point is it stands. So it's aimed at detecting potential mass shooters before they commit any crime. Per the memorandum, Barr has directed the Department of Justice and the FBI to lead an effort to refine our ability to identify, assess, and engage potential mass shooters before they strike. So he talks in this a lot about how the indicators that someone could commit a mass shooting are a lot more subtle than terrorists of other stripes. So jihadist terrorists have certain markers that FBI, CIA finds troubling. They can organize stings. They can, find materials for planning events and things like that. What they're talking about here is basically going into things like medical records to determine if you have had any kind of mental disability or mental ailment that they could pin on it, and actually being able to effect arrests without anything that would constitute evidence that would be like trying to carry out a crime. Basically saying the ingredients were right for you to be someone who could commit mass murder, and therefore that gives us the ability to arrest there, which is kind of crazy. What do you think?
You know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of when the U.S. would go in the Middle East. That guy looks like he might be a terrorist, and the guy could just be some shopkeeper that had no desire to be a terrorist, and then they would capture and torture him for months and months and months, and then lo and behold, after they let him go for not being a terrorist, all of a sudden he somehow got radicalized, and I'm sure that there is no chance that a similar kind of event would happen with what you're describing.
Look,
So
go ahead. Take
this
it away,
is
Paul.
just one of those things where what they describe, they don't call it an arrest. They call it, detention or court-ordered mental health treatment, substance abuse counseling, and electronic monitoring, right? So for someone who is identified as being at higher risk for committing a particular type of crime, not someone who was amassing guns or someone who was gonna do something, or somebody who attempted to do, but somebody who fits a profile. That has constitutional implications that if this were to be this is one of those things that really gets in my people who are like, once they try to do that, there'll be a lawsuit and they'll deem it unconstitutional because it so obviously is. And then I'm like, the Patriot Act, but Ed Snowden and, the FISA courts, wait, you can have a secret court give a secret license to be like, oh, all of the illegal spying that you do doesn't count as a violation of the Fourth Amendment rubber stamp. Like, that's kind of the thing that this is, and the quieter it is and the more powerful it is and the more it's allowed to sort of seep into how the Department of Justice does things, the more leeway it has and the harder it will be to dismantle. And I think sounding the alarm on something like this early is appropriate. Even if it could obviously be overturned in the judicial process, we need people to be aware of it now and be on the lookout and file those claims when they become appropriate.
Yeah. Again, with the amount of intrusion and how we have a pre-crime program.
It's not called that.
Yeah,
I mean,
but-
that's
yeah,
obviously
or-
from
yeah, some- yeah,
1984.
Yeah,
I
something
mean,
like
why
that.
not? Let's just
Yeah.
use it.
I mean,
that's what
it's
Whitney
accurate.
Webb is calling it.
It's accurate.
I mean, you
but-
might as well call it that. But hold on, because here's what I'm trying to say here is that, we've been warned about this so many times in the past, and about the incursion of technology and how people are easily judged on the streets, especially with how, there's numerous examples of police corruption and them, basically profiling people. This is a recipe for disaster that can happen to anyone. And, we got to be aware of just how inept and corrupt our system is. And something like this forming is a bad idea. It's a recipe for disaster. Daniel.
Also, this is going to directly affect people with less means because in America,
Yep.
healthcare is not a right. Therefore, mental illness is not a right to be fixed. And if having mental issues, again, not having guns, not all the other things that one might think might be better, even though that this law shouldn't have been exist in the first place, we'll get that out of the way. It means that poor people are going to go to jail in a disproportionate amount than people who can pay to have a therapist or something of that nature, all because they had terrible luck in their life or X, Y, or Z or 30 other things. They can't afford their medication. So this is also something that you could address if that's something that if I'm saying that if even if we give the mental issue validity, which I'm not going to, Medicare for all would be a much better solution to fix this. And this is what I've been saying for these shootings, that I think the worst thing about mass shootings, I mean, obviously besides the people that are directly involved, is the government.
I got to interrupt you, buddy.
Go for it.
Michael Underlerger, aloha, Cassie Lloyd. I love Bernie, but I refuse to be outbid. Hashtag Tulsi time. Hashtag
man.
Tulsi time. Hashtag Tulsi time.
Okay, that gets one aloha. Give me a second.
All right, one positive note. I mean, in a deep, dark,
I think it's
depressing.
51 aloha.
Wow, 51. Thank you so much for the super chat.
There.
The super
You
chat.
happy?
So many alohas.
I think I'm just going to call that 51. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the super chats. This really helps us out. So I think as a final note, we got to be aware of these programs coming into existence, and we have to just remember we have to be involved in this election cycle because stuff like this is sadly becoming a reality. But
Before Kit
yeah.
goes into our wonderful, wonderful patrons, thank you guys so much, and thank you to all our people for doing super chat, who many of which are Patreon people. Thank you again. You make this work. I want to give everyone a heads up that Paul is going to be doing, I believe, his first interview, but it's really going to be a podcast afterwards. So if you want to see something that I haven't even seen before, except that I have, but don't know that, stick around after the break.
Yeah. And basically me and Daniel will be shoved off to the side. It's just going to be Paul.
I'm going to be relegated, kicked off the own show.
Kicked off our own show. I'm the host of the show. What's going on here? But anyways, if you really like Hard Lens Media, because we know people are saying, hey, I'm not being notified when you guys come on air.
I can't put a super chat in.
Yeah.
We have another place you could put your money.
So with that being said, look, the way around it, Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time is when we go live. So adjust to your time zone accordingly. Please make sure, double check and triple check that you subscribe, hit that ring bell notification, like, comment, and share our content. That's how you still, I guess, can continue to get notified. But again, Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time is when we go live. But if you really want to help us out, keep the lights on. Make sure we get better gear and camera equipment and future updates for this studio that we're building. Please consider being a Patreon supporter. Your support will help us build something that hasn't been seen in the city of Chicago, and that is a strong, active, progressive, independent media network covering stories that corporate media will not cover. And with that being said, I want to read our list of on the Hall of Heroes, our Patreon supporters. You guys make this thing happen. So shout out to Myra Alejandra Sanchez, Carlos Ozario, Alan Marone, P.N. Timson, Ishmael Rufus, Chase, Gregory Church, Kira McCown, Cassie Lloyd, Denise Gibson, Unknown Space Pioneer, Sandra and Grayson, N.C. Schaefer, Anthony Nelson, Teresa Collins, Brittany Cabrera, Desmond Turek, Jack Moore, Sandra Mayer, Giffy, Lewis, Ariana Hensing, Michael Ealing, Emily, Eric Unger, Freethinker59, Todd Adams, Ramon Lazo, Carrie Barber, Alexis Haas, Aaron Steinwolf, Lucy Grever Conroy, Ofri Edward Ohms, Denise McCartney, Lance Vera, Mark Lloyd Baker, Mike Terminate, Roy Hartley, Ashwin Ruvkumar, Mike Honcho, Dick Newell, Rena Q, Jeff, Fred Edward, Akbash Shakita, Maya Jones, Julie, Kate, Jeff Green, Susan Singer, Deanne, Savut Ted, Kai Arnold, Brian Thomas, Dimitri N, Walou Demuni, Carl Aspa, Jack Papuro, Yutai, Stina Krautz, Tony watches closely, Amala, Burns Lawler, Chrome Magnum, Gramps, Jimmy Coutura, John Surdilla, and shout out to our rogue trader, Wesley Wiles, who's been introducing us to a lot of congressional candidates. You Patreon supporters help us out. To all our viewers and subscribers, please consider being a Patreon supporter. It will help us out make this studio into something that has not been seen in the city of Chicago. Daniel Lupker, real quick.
Yeah, guys, don't go anywhere. I'm serious. I know. Go to the bathroom, get some snacks. This is going to be interesting. Don't go anywhere.
Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome back. I'm here with a very good friend of mine and someone who I have a lot of respect for and really like to chat about politics with, political ideology, political philosophy. A friend of mine who has a degree in political science. Please welcome to the show, Chris Hewitt. I still have the nameplates on there. I'm going to get them off of the thing. Chris Hewitt, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we were talking. We were like, we've got to do something. We've got to chit chat about stuff because I feel like
We argue with each other, not in front of people, way too much.
right. I feel like there's all kinds of great content of just like, that's a great thought. That's a great. It's everything.
Yeah,
there's-
people at the bar get to enjoy it all the time, but
Yeah.
we want to expand the audience a little bit. People that
Exactly.
are actually interested.
Yeah. So I decided, well, what should we talk about? And then you brought it up, actually, because we were talking about various forms of government. I think one of them that had come up was, I think Israel was in the news, and we were like, man, the way Israel does government is very weird. But then it kind of morphed into socialism, communism. Is China really even communist? Is it really even socialist? What is their government system? And how does it compare? And how can we compare and contrast that to other governmental systems, and how does culture play a role in that? When we particularly this revolved a little bit around the last couple of weeks, that South Park episode, right? And how much do private companies have to kowtow to the Chinese government,
Right.
and then how much is their government making accommodations
Oh,
for capitalism and as much as they
There's
espouse
a
to
lot
not
of snake
be.
eating
So
itself.
Right.
Considering one is a communist government and the other is a very capitalist one.
all right, so maybe that's a good place to start. Is China a communist government?
Well, one of the things that is most illuminating to me is what countries tell themselves that they are, right? You can believe one thing, but, they're myths. The people that, in America, we tell ourselves that we're the greatest country on earth, oldest democracy and all this stuff, which, of course, we can parse out and look at the veracity of, as does everyone else. And, China, of course, has a very similar thing. I think quite technically, since Deng Xiaoping, in 1979, they kind of abandoned a lot of the Maoist agrarian communism that most defined China and still does as far as their, their mythos, their idealism is to achieve communism. But since Deng Xiaoping in 79, and you have the Gang of Four trials, they basically publicly disavowed in the mistakes of the Cultural Revolution and adopted more of this, what we would call basically a capitalist corporatist system.
Yeah,
so
so I've-
1979. since
79 when Deng
1979.
Xiaoping comes into power, and I remember reading Mao spoke about Deng Xiaoping as like and his sort of brand of operating within the communist system as kind of an affront to the ideals but a necessary
Revisionist.
evil.
Well, so like revisionism is what a lot of the slander of the fellow communists would throw at each other when you're like trying to do the forms and functions of capitalist governments that are really successful at building planes, trains, automobiles, and cupcakes. And you as your
Cupcakes,
things that are great, but you don't necessarily need. That you're by doing the forms and functions of the capitalist states, you're kind of losing the forest for the trees. So they would call them like revisionists. But ironically, Deng Xiaoping was a big Maoist, and then he reverses course post-Mao. Chinese politicians can be as hypocritical as American ones.
Well, I think there was some recognition almost of that over that time period of, hey, there are enough people who have enough incentives to engage with some kind of capitalist structure, company structure, foreign companies, right? How do we interface with that? And I think there's a number of things that are going on, right? So there's the human portion of the fact that, hey, capitalism is going on and individuals really can benefit if they engage with that capitalism. And to as much extent as they're allowed to, there's going to be some portion of people that have incentive to do so. But more than that, you live in a world where other nations are propping up this system of economic trade. And no one exists in a vacuum. So we talk about political
Certainly.
systems and ideas and how they're manifestations in a long way of their culture, but they don't exist in a vacuum.
Poor agrarian communist societies that are trying to organize around these really utopian principles, man, you can poison that a lot with Blue Jeans and Beatles records. It's really hard to, in the moment, deny your people comforts and economic safety and security in service to these wider ideals. So yeah.
I would say there's even disagreement on the socialist/communist left about whether you can consider China truly a socialist country or truly a communist country. I think you'll find some people that will say, no, it has these economic zones. It's clearly trying to interface with capitalism on this particular plane. But you'll have others that will say, yeah, they're having to do those things in some way or another, but certainly the goals are there, right? It's certainly a socialist experiment. It has some accommodations, but these are even on the far left.
So I would compare it to like how conservatives in America might say things like, oh, we really love the founding fathers. We really like democracy and all this stuff. But really, when it comes down to it, they'll sacrifice that in an instant if it's convenient.
Yeah, I'm going to adjust your camera real quick. You can
Oh, sure.
You can keep going.
The Confucius conservatives of China's traditional 19th century seem to have weathered the communist storm of Mao and the agrarians post-Chinese Civil War. And so now what you see is like, oh, sure, it's these forms of communism, but really the conservative authoritarian old guard has really just come back, and they kind of ride the wind and sails of this really positive thing where Mao, there's a lot of Maoism that reads really well. I mean, poetic and utopian, the likes of which Stalin could only hope for, but Mao had a really different view, right? It was the peasant, it wasn't the proletariat, it was the peasants. And it wasn't in the cities where the workers are, it's out in the fields where the peasants are. And he saw this really differently as to where the communist revolution would take hold as a global rural versus the urban, whereas way more in line kind of with Engels, who, and they were just arguing about where the revolution will come from.
What sector of the economy?
Right.
Right. So
where the proletariat, will the proletariat do it? Is it going to come from here? Is it going to come from there?
The rural working class or the factory working class, I guess, is the
right, which is the distinction. Okay. I'm like, oh, is that a really big deal?
Doesn't it matter?
Can't they both hang out together? Can't we? We need
who cares where it comes from, right?
And we need the tractors. So, but he also had Mao had a saying, and I'm butchering all this, of course, because I don't speak Chinese, but he was something like, we need a Chinese version of this. So unlike global international communism that was like our brothers everywhere, solidarity, there's just more like, oh, we're doing a very specific China thing. So what we're doing here is not necessarily something we're subscribing that will work in Moscow, but it'll work everywhere that there's peasants. It'll work everywhere where you have the imperialists are dominating your cities and corrupting your capitalists. It'll work there. So it was a very distinct. Deng Xiaoping called it a cult of personality, but Mao, in his little red book, argued a much more universal thing that I think was much more idealistic and compelling than Stalinism. Right?
Yeah, I mean, and those two ideas, right? The accusation that it's a cult of personality and the claim that it's really an agrarian, egalitarian, for everyone kind of movement sort of miss each other. I mean, the Little Red Book is plastered with Mao's face all over it. It's hard to say that it isn't.
But it isn't one, yeah.
Part his personality is not a huge part of it. But I mean, to the same point, what is written in the Little Red Book is very much like it is a Chinese version of
part of
Marx and Engels, right?
part of what the little, his face and the propaganda and all that stuff is, another saying that they used was, the agrarian, the peasant class is a blank slate. They're not like the proletariat that has generations of politics behind them. They're ignorant peasants. You can start anew. You can start afresh with them. And he was using it as a good thing, not as a negative. But so part of that where we see propaganda of like, oh, you're really forcing this stuff on this group of people. I think then, and again, this is their arguments, not mine necessarily, but was that these are forms and functions that you need to do to start a thing. And so, yeah, I'm going to plaster my name all over everything. Everyone's going to know me, but I'm starting something bigger than myself afterwards.
So do you think Chinese version of communism, who do you think was closer to being right? Was Maoism?
Stalin?
Yeah, Mao or Deng Xiaoping?
Oh, well.
Was it a cult of personality, or was there really an effort to make this go beyond
Well, the Cultural
China?
Revolution was, if you ask the Chinese and the Chinese government and Deng Xiaoping, they have officially decided that the Cultural Revolution was a whoops-a-daisy. I mean, they use different term, but but they, acknowledge.
Wait, so
that,
is it the Great Leap Forward, or is it the
Great Leap Forward, was that Russia or was that
Great Leap Forward's China also? They're different eras, and I get them confused. But the greater Cultural Revolution is
maybe it was the Great Leap Forward that they're talking about was the mistake, but it was so they introduced the judiciary back during this time is where they got the rightists and they kind of do a lot of purging, the anti-rightists campaign, and they do a lot of purging and a lot of international condemnation, and then afterwards in '89 is when they try the Gang of Four, the Politburo who was involved in all that, as a show to the international community that, look, we're bringing the rule of law back. We're also opening up our markets back. We're, Nixon came, we're open for business. And
when was that, in 76?
This is 79. This is all
79.
around the same
Okay.
time. I think this trial goes on in 84 or something. But,
Okay.
that's all part of the same pack. So who is right? Deng Xiaoping. If you're like, hey, is China the next global superpower and who's responsible for that more, Mao or Deng? I don't know. That's a pretty good question. I would definitely say that if they went along with Maoism in its purest form, you might have something much more like Pyongyang going on, only with, a billion more people. And I don't know that would be as successful for the Chinese. Would that be better for everyone in the world? Would it be better for the people in, say, Hong Kong? Would it, I don't.
Well, if you're comparing it to Pyongyang, it sounds like you'd say it's probably worse for, at the very least, the people of China.
Yeah, if you're asking a modern Chinese person who's my age and whose parents and grandparents were involved in the Chinese Civil War and the occupation of Japan, and is life better now than it was? Then your answer is probably there. But if you ask the people of Tibet, if you ask the Uyghurs, if you ask, there is a cost always to these to the empirical empires taking care of its people, specifically economically. There seem to be losses for those gains. That they had war with India. They're at a conflict stance with most of their neighbors. It has been a largely peaceful process for them, for the people of Shanghai and Beijing. Just like in America, we have our hands very lightly bloodied. We have a professional mercenary corps that does that for us now. Apparently, and they're for hire, I hear, if you pay a lot of money, you can.
Well, the other thing, the way the United States, first of all, we're a colonialist empire, which China is not. They don't operate in that same capacity. They're not. So the United States, it's kind of comparing apples and oranges in a large way. But in the way that the United States has a bunch of overseas wars to prop up, international hegemony around a commodity.
It's a unique situation.
Right.
It's true. It's not.
Right,
We're
but
in a very unipolar.
But Western
stance
countries in
right
general operated via a colonialist, imperialist model throughout much of the 18th and 19th century that
Oh yeah, certainly.
right.
Yeah.
And that a lot of the sort of the hangover of that went over into the 20th and now the 21st century. That the only really Asian nation we saw try to emulate that on a mass scale was Japan, to really disastrous effect, and had the entire international community go, "Man, you're doing the colonialism thing like way too wrong, man. Like tone it down with
Yeah.
Nanjing and stuff.
Oh,
Come on."
man.
But China never really did that. Their form of trying to gain international relevance has been through economic trade. And you bring up some points of
Well, same with the United States.
right. I'll put it this way: China has gone for the economic trade route, sans colonialist, imperialist militarism.
Without barracks, right? Sure.
Right. I mean, things like building highways in Africa and things like that, and facilitating trade in Southeast Asia. Their borders, certainly they've got with the Uyghur Muslims in the west, Tibet in the west and south. Obviously, there's been a lot of hand-wringing over Macau and Hong Kong and exactly how that's going to play out, and certainly as well Taiwan/Chinese Taipei. Thanks, Olympics. But
Do they still do that?
yeah, in the Olympics,
still-
they announce it as Chinese Taipei
Okay.
because China is in the Olympics.
Right.
And they would be mad if they called it Taiwan. Anyway, it's really hard to look at those situations of a state that is attempting to run under a socialist banner, socialist communist banner, and how it relates to ethnic and religious minority people groups in regions that border it or were at one time part of it, but it sees as part of it.
Sure. Oh, sure. Well, you go to the Uyghurs, you probably would argue all of those Maoist communist principles. If you're the administrator of that state, I bet you're using your patriotism all over the place. It's when you come home to your very wealthy family who's driving Cadillacs in Shanghai that you're like, oh, well, economics though, son, we gotta real politic this, and all of a sudden the principles of communism are kind of to the wayside because you want the latest apps for your kids. But when it comes to the minority peoples over here, that's all principle. That's pure principle. We're trying to spread communism, and this is bigger than you and your ethno-religious things, and we got to send you to re-education camps.
There's a little hypocrisy going on with we want to have Shenzhen have its factories make money, but
Right.
We've got
You
this
wag
one
your-
child
you-
policy.
you-
We got to
you
make
wag
sure
the
they're
fingers
following.
of patriotism and your mythos when it's most convenient, and you pretty much see that everywhere. I mean, you see it in the Islamic State. You see it, governmental hypocrisy and nationalism itself is myth making.
It's a universal trait.
It's a universal trait of nationalism is myth making. You have to describe a difference between Belgium and France. Otherwise, why are they different countries? Like, what is the difference between the United States and Canada? Oh, well, we're free and they're a socialist nightmare hellscape where you can't get health care unless you stand in line. Like, that's probably not true. But if it wasn't true and we were basically the same peoples and the same culture and society, how do we justify these independent, redundant militaries, all this stuff? You have to justify it. You have to myth make.
Unless you don't.
Unless you don't. I mean,
And then you don't have to.
you
justify it,
And
and
that's
then
where
you stop.
ideology comes in, right?
Yeah.
So,
So that's what I mean. It's one of those okay, I look as someone who considers myself a lefty. A hard time putting labels on things. I don't know that I would say communist or, anarchist and
you can let other people label you. You just say what you believe,
Yeah.
and then let other people label.
so. But I wonder, under this broad socialist umbrella, if we include all of those labels, anarcho-syndicalist, communist, anarcho-communist, as varying kinds of socialism, or even you could even look at it as Marx and Engels described it as, communism or anarchism as the end goal of socialism or the end point, right? That socialism will naturally end up in communism, and that capitalism will naturally end up in socialism. are there any countries that you can think of that are trying to do the socialism thing in one form or another that are seeing moderate success or any success in the modern era? Say, a la Catalonia. as an example.
Right. Well, in the news very recently, you have the northern Kurds in Syria. They pronounce it the Rojava in northern Syria. You have three cannons that were largely independent and much missed in the news media. Oddly enough, are they like to focus on these female fighters, right? That's the big story. The PKK, they have these in the middle of the Middle East, fighting ISIS fighters. Are these ladies doing a bang up job?
It's all about identity politics. They
which
just can't let it go.
Which is great. This is a thing, but much more important in this area are these like libertarian, socialist, commune, anti-hierarchical, like every level of government in these three canons in the Rojava have a female equivalent to the lawmaker. So every mayor has a female mayor, and they're working on doing the same for other ethno-religious people within. Because, by the way, it's not all Kurds. There's Turkmen, there's Yazidi, there's tons of people here, and they worked out this thing because Assad, when this civil war started, this is a largely undeveloped region on purpose. They didn't want to develop oil wells there because they didn't want to give these people any means. So when the war breaks out and they're already kind of independent and armed, he didn't really want to mess with them. So he didn't mess with them. So they stayed kind of autonomous. And in their autonomy, where everyone's fighting away from them, they create this really interesting utopian thing that I haven't seen or heard of anywhere. And it's not just a Kurdish thing. And the Iraqi Kurds right next door have a way more traditional boss man, mentality. The Iraqi Kurds are rather notoriously, what is the word? Patronage, but with families. What is the
Patriarchal?
Well, no,
No.
you're giving to your family members.
Family-
Is that just patronage?
Is it just patronage?
Do we get
Maybe.
everybody? No.
Matronage.
But next door in Syria, you had this the petri dish erupted with this experiment, and then out of nowhere, it's largely being strangled in its crib, and it's really the untold story of this whole American pullout. And it's very tragic. It's very sad. So I see it there. This is
Right.
a place, and and I don't know that it's happens without, as Marx and Engels would say, it's going to bloom and blossom, because what I see is the powers that be, regardless of what country you're in, regardless of what system you have, the people that have, the haves versus the have-nots, and they're playing a very effective game of whack-a-mole throughout the world, throughout the centuries. And this is a latest example of that.
You're saying the haves are effectively able to just prevent all uprisings with the power they have.
It's not even an uprising. Just leave them alone. They're doing it by themselves, harming no one.
So you mentioned Catalonia. I think
Well, I had mentioned Catalonia to you prior, or did you mention it to me just now?
just now.
So,
I mentioned
okay.
it just now. We
Right.
talked a little bit about this when we were talking about the various topics we wanted to talk about. 'cause we're just-
Rojava was an homage to Catalonia. if you-
Right.
if you get my drift.
Because, really not all that different, right? Catalonia existed as a state for just a few years before Franco came and took it all over again. But those type of uprisings and there's another one I was thinking of that was in South America that was also relatively short-lived. But there have been others that have been longer-lived. Part of that, people argue, is that socialism, or that those types of socialism have a very hard time coexisting with capitalist systems. That capitalist systems will seek to pressure, snuff them out, because capitalism is all about aggregating that power, and it just cannot abide some portion of that power wanting to be egalitarian.
Sure, right, and that's the Cold War bipolar paradigm. It's these two systems can't exist with each other.
Oh, I remember what I wanted to ask. How similar is it to when was this? 1880 and 1871, the Paris Commune.
Oh, the Paris Commune. I'd have to bone up on this.
Yeah,
What's the
it's an
Paris Commune?
esoteric one, but it's one that
Sounds very familiar.
I feel like it got referenced quite a lot by Marx and Engels.
Mm-hmm.
Like they wrote that happened toward the end of their lives,
Mm-hmm.
right? And their works had a lot of influence on it, and it was short lived. That's a common theme, unfortunately, among a lot of these smaller groups that are trying for some kind of, anarcho-communistic, socialistic formulation of government. So I wonder what.
Well, the myth of capitalism, right, is that you have resources that you can exploit, right? You have an ever-expanding that way to go. You have frontierism, laissez-faire or economic capitalism is like, oh, you could continued awesome upgrowth is always possible. And, now that we're at a global level, we realize that we're not on a flat Earth going out towards an ever-expanding pastures that we can exploit if we just
Wait, we're
learn
not
how to
riding
do
on the
it.
back of a turtle?
We're instead on a spaceship floating through, a lot of nothing out there. So the socialist model, I think, is going to come back into play more because it's just not true that we have everything that we can continually exploit and do with this model over here, because that is what capitalism is. And
Right.
it's not a slam on, to me, I don't think that it's saying that we'll never have creativity again and that we'll never have these, you'll never get a better Twix bar because no one will try to compete with you. Like, competition will still exist. I don't see any problem with having a, especially when it comes to intellectual properties and stuff like that, of having a robust competition amongst things that are interesting for people to buy and consume and eat or things like that. It's just that when you have a capitalist system involved in healthcare, oil, air, water, those things are not the things that we have forever. So those are the spaceship parts on our Federation Starship Earth that are off the table for the capitalists to exploit. But go ahead and make,
There's
X-Men versus Marvel movies all you want.
Yeah.
Like, go.
Well, so there are a couple of things I want to point out there, and we're not really having a is communism a good thing argument right now. We're really more concentrated on systems of government, I guess. But I mean, that's where the conversation went. Yeah, there's so much to unpack there.
So, when it comes to systems of government, are these systems of government representing what people want and are trying to do? Like, do the Chinese people want communism? Do Americans want freedom? Is that our thing? And is our government representing us and doing that?
Well, and what does freedom mean? If freedom is just freedom to buy what the things you want to buy, then I mean, I could take it or leave it.
Right. But is the myth matching up to is the rhetoric matching up to the policies? Are the policies helping the people? Are they really that different from each other? Because frankly, it seems like the American citizenry and the Chinese citizenry want very similar things.
Right.
So
I mean,
why are
people
we
want very
adversarial?
similar things.
Why are we at odds with each other?
Right. I think a lot of it is ideological, and
But is it though?
maybe not. The part of it that isn't is the very specifically American libertarianism, the philosophical American libertarianism, meaning there is a strain of thought that says, basically all for me and nothing for anyone else. If you can get it and you can deprive it from others, that is your end goal, is amassing the most.
And is your right.
Yeah. And it's everyone's trying to do it, and so it's just totally fair because everyone's trying to do it that's the thing, right? And that type of...
And it's cynical. It says that everyone's trying to do it.
Right.
Right.
It's very Ayn Randian.
It doesn't believe that you're not trying to do it, right? Because if it does believe that, right, then it falls apart.
But what you're talking about is moving things like the air and the water and the oil into an economic category that a libertarian would not allow, that an American capitalist could not allow. How can you not allow me to try and treat something that is finite as though it's infinite? and treat something that is infinite as though it's finite and charge you for it and make money off of it. How are you going to deprive me that right? And what socialists and communists are saying is, look, we want to take this air and this water and this oil and we want to move it into this very privatized form of economics and make it categorized as a sort of a public, non-fungible good. Right? It's a public good that nobody should be able to just capture and start selling to people. Nestle shouldn't be allowed to just suck up the water out of the ground and sell it back to us.
Sense. I mean, I think, most peoples around the globe, regardless of their ideology, will agree with that. I mean, we are on spaceship Earth. We got to share the corn. That's a pretty common sense thing. You have to really intellectually bend over backwards. You have to say that global warming doesn't exist, that it's a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese. You have to say that, nope, everyone is just as libertarian as mean-spirited, and doesn't really believe in altruism just like me. You have to convince yourself that government only exists to protect my property and has no other role. You really have to convince yourself of that. You have to have a major, major corporate media constantly feeding into that. You have to have militaries all over the world reinforcing and bringing the goods back home to do that. You have
Seems like
to
you're
do
describing the ingredients
a
here in
whole
America
lot
right
of
now.
Things to convince people that we're not on a spaceship and that we don't need to reserve these things. We do. It's common sense, and anyone that really thinks about it very long, I think, comes to that those conclusions.
Is there any country in the world today that you think is so apart from the Kurdish people that are very short-lived, very closer to Catalonia, but anyone that is either using the moniker communist or socialist that is doing the closest to living up to that,
to the Leninist stuff,
or at least a general ideal, right? If I was to basically put communism, anarchism, and socialism into a basic general ideal that everyone can agree on, the very basic fundamentals is worker ownership of the means of production via some means. What country or municipality do you think is at least attempting to get as close to that as a standard?
Or municipality within?
Sure.
I think you'd be pretty hard pressed. The example of the Rojava, most means of production, if you are actually able to build tanks, planes, trains, and automobiles, then you're co-opted. If you actually successfully do that, then the economic incentive to be less socialistic just breaks the dam.
In America, but you're just saying basically everywhere.
As soon as China came out of the
And this is
Maoist
the
agrarian
economic zones.
reforms, and the first next step after that is let's do economic reform. Let's wipe our hands of all of that stuff. And the minute we can, we're not in an emergency state anymore. We're not fighting the Japanese and all sides. We can put down the revolution and start eating cheeseburgers. We're going to do that right away. That they chose it in 1979. Mao wasn't even cold.
Yeah, wow.
And Deng Xiaoping betrayed his own values very publicly. I mean, that's not really a disputed thing. This is Wikipedia stuff. I mean, it's they introduced those judicial reforms and all that stuff to the wider market. I mean, they wanted the seat on the United Nations. So the seat of the UN was Taipei's until 1970, deep into the 70s. And, they wanted that international recognition because that's your next step. You don't live in a bubble. None of these countries live in a bubble, like you said.
Unless Earth is the bubble.
Unless Earth's a bubble. And that's what, you might disapprove of globalist rhetoric, but, to me, that's the
obvious
problem,
reality on the ground.
The problem with
the Earth, in the sphere.
The problem with the globalists is that the ruling elite in all these countries is who is in charge no matter what. They take off the uniform depending on what score the team has. You know what I mean? It's
I don't think anyone's really a globalist. So I remember when I was a kid, there was the term globalization, and that was just a description of a naturally occurring thing. Guess what? Telecommunications and shipping are all getting better, and that means that internationalization and business is getting easier.
Globalist is a pejorative by the Alex Jones right wing, in that if you advocate for things that that dismantle borders, then you are a globalist. And here, the problem with the Venn diagram of truth is that there is some truth to that, and that, yeah, people with money and elites have no problem with this stuff. They love multinational corporations. That, oh, I can exploit resources in more than one country? Sure, I'll be a globalist. Like, oh, the United Nations can pave
seems
the way
profitable.
for my, great. Oh, now I have an international body that'll help me do this. Instead of having to go to wars and build up militaries, now I just have to successfully get a vote through diplomatically. That's a lot easier. So the problem isn't the United Nations and globalism. The problem is who we hire to go do that stuff, and the anti-democratic forces that make sure that the elites are in power regardless.
One thing I know China does that I see is, at the very least, a good attempt at this sort of interfacing with a capitalist system, while at the same time trying to have the workers own the means of production. There's a planned economy kind of ideal. Is for any company that exists in China that I think has more than 5 members of the Chinese party as employees of the company, has to have some percentage. It's a specific percentage of the board of that company has to be members of the Chinese party, the Communist Party. And that's a way of basically very high level making sure that even though these businesses are operating in a capitalistic capacity, even though these businesses operate out of Shanghai and Shenzhen and Hong Kong and Macau and are operating with foreign businesses and are having to play that game, at the very least, they're doing things like overhiring workers because the national imperative is
Right,
we need to get employment up. It's not acting necessarily in the capitalistic best interests of the individual country.
I mean, could you imagine how handy it would be for us to have political representation on the board of Facebook, especially right now? I mean, we're trying to drag them before congressional hearings and wag our fingers at them, and all they have to say are things like, oh, I don't know that off the top of my head, or I don't have that in front of me right now. I'll see you next time on my tour. But if you have them on the board where it's like, oh,
or I'll be happy to tell your uncle how to work his iPhone.
Yeah, right? I mean, it's I can totally see that as, but then you got to wonder, is the cart pulling the horse, right? How much is the Communist Party sitting on these boards? They're involved in all these companies, and how much is the influence going both ways? I don't know. Maybe it'll be a real appendix-like, and they'll just shed the appendices of communism altogether at a certain point. But right now, I think it's very helpful in the mythos of the Communist Party and the government of Chinese to have these aspirational ideals, because there's not a country on earth whose government says, oh, we just rule people. That's all we do. Every government on earth has a mythos, has a story, has a reason why it exists and why the borders are what they are. Sometimes these borders are very hard fought over centuries of war. Sometimes they're invented with the Sykes-Picot line by British and French people thousands of miles away, and they're completely unjust and never work. Sometimes these borders are oceans. But these mythos are really important, and they're useful for governments. And I think that communism is a useful thing. It's an aspirational thing. We want to, apparently their rhetoric is we want to aspire to communism. We may not do it that much anymore. We have a few people on the boards of directors that are trying to make sure things, but we aspire to it. Just like,
that it's a project.
It's a project.
Socialist project.
It's a socialist project. In the meantime, I don't know if this ties it in well, but I was speaking with my brother-in-law about school choice in public schools and a death spiral of public education, and how he's like, well, I'm into free school choice. And I'm like, well, that's a death spiral for education. He's a principal, he's a teacher, that's why we're talking about this. And I'm like, well, and he acknowledges all the problems, the death spiral of choice. And at the end of the day, he's like, yeah, but, my kids are kids now. And thinking about, if my kids, in 10 years, maybe the schools will be better, but my kids will be adults by then. And that, I think, is the true tension of ideology, is that we are temporary things. And ideology is bigger than that and more long-term than that. And it's really, really, really easy to get people to focus on themselves in the temporary, and it's a little harder to sacrifice for a future that is uncertain. And yeah, that was.
I totally feel you, man. Like long-term planning, I just wish that more organizations and governments would do some long-term planning instead of like quarterly planning. You have so many note cards, and I feel like you didn't flip through them. Is there anything that you have any burning tidbits that you wanted to add in?
You know, I was looking at some stuff for Hong Kong here. Are you familiar with the Hong Kong legislative, like the legislature of Hong Kong? You know,
Not
we were talking
how
about
it's
this.
all that drastically different from China.
They have a very interesting assembly. You have 35, 70-member assembly. You have 35 directly elected, and then 35 seats that are basically like trade union type things, like 2 commercial, 2 industrial, it's a very fascinating thing, and it's not like they do in mainland China. It's a very unique and different system that lends itself. I think a big part of the problem why they have so much pro Beijing politics in Hong Kong is that they have a lot of these business interests, and because Beijing is lining up with the capitalists more and more, it's making Hong Kong less distinct as they used to be. And so I think the pro-democracy forces in Hong Kong are having a real hard time gaining traction because we're bringing you jobs, right? Jobs,
Yeah.
jobs.
And that's a kind of a union. It's a union style of organizing. Sounds
I
like.
suppose so, but it's like codified into their legislature.
Right.
It's strange. It's a strange thing that I haven't seen elsewhere.
And this is, I think, okay, moral of the story is government systems are different across the board, have societal origins that don't often make tons of sense across.
They're organs you live with, and you know, it's slow to change, but they're very much like bodily organs.
Have you,
almost.
are you familiar with CM Punk?
Yeah.
So this is a super chat from Mr. Orochi is asking if we're familiar with CM Punk. I'm not.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Kit's staring at me like I just told him I have a weasel in my pants.
I mean, I'm saying like someone
No,
cool is talking about a band that I've heard my niece listen to. I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard of CM Punk. Is it Henry Rollins or something?
I don't know.
Wait, are you being serious?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna have to. We'll get educated.
We're gonna get
Thank you,
lectured
Mr.
for a
Orochi.
second.
We'll figure out who CM Punk is. We've greatly disappointed Kit over there. All right. We need to do this again. We need to do more of these.
If you want.
Really?
Yeah. Yes. We should need to do.
I
Go, just go.
All right. Come.
Hold on, wait.
All right.
Wait. Come on.
Are you-
Okay.
He's gonna do it. Okay.
So right now we're off the camera. Hold on. Here we are. Yeah, I'm familiar who CM Punk is. I'm familiar with WWE, ECW, WCW. CM Punk is, I believe he's no longer with the WWE, but he is from the city of Chicago, gentlemen. Hello, quit looking at your smartphones. He's from the city of Chicago. He's one of us.
I know everyone in Chicago.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm very disappointed. Very disappointed you pulled upon.
Sorry, I will have to learn.
I mean, come on,
I
man.
think he's saying it's a wrestling.
Yeah, he's a wrestler.
Oh, I thought it was like a band.
No! What's wrong with you?
So that's where they're like fighting in a ring.
We were talking about communism. I don't know what this wrestler is. Anyway,
I think that's a good note.
Yeah.
that is a note, and it's the one we'll end it on.
Yeah. I'm disappointed in everyone on the team today.
Kit's disappointed.
I can't. I still have not been told why you're disappointed.
Because
He's from Chicago.
He's
He's,
from
one of
Chicago.
us.
He's just from Chicago.
No,
There's
but he's
millions
also a
of people
famous
from-
wrestler. He's done a lot of good work, too.
I
He's done
have
a lot
done
of...
so little wrestling. You'd be very surprised at how little wrestling I've actually done.
all right,
Are we still on?
we are still
Very
on.
much.
We're very much still on.
There's still 135 people that watch that.
This is Chris Hewitt, a friend of
you.
mine and someone with a degree in political science, and always patient with me as I poke and prod and be like, "But communism, huh? How about communism?"
Yeah, it's great. Sure.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Tune in tomorrow. We'll be on at our regular time, 6 p.m. Hopefully we'll get Chris back. Give us all the ones in the chat if you want to have Chris back on the show. All right. Peace,
Cool.
everyone.